Tov, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out. It means a great deal to me. And it's a Monday evening, and it's before Rosh Hashanah.
2 weeks.
And so if at any time it's too late and you're tired or you have other things to do, please, by all means, I fully, in memory of my mother. And somehow, when my father died just 4 years ago, I stopped giving that cheer for my mother, and it's something that I'd like to reactivate and dedicate this year to Llama, who died 36 years ago on Yom Kippur. Tomorrow is the English date of her Yahrzeit, and my father, who died in June of 2015 on Chaf Aleph Sivan. And I especially find it meaningful to sit right in that corner because I could see the little plaque in memory of my mother, and even though it's just a plaque, somehow it gives me a sense that I can touch something that represents her being. 36 years is a long time, and my mother is very, very far away now. Although I do feel the presence. My father, having died only 4 years ago, I can still physically feel a connection, a contact, a physical contact with him somehow. But the further one is away, the less of that physical contact and more of a spiritual sense of feeling the presence. I'm indebted to the Bayit. The Bayit gave my mother some of her greatest memories. In the late 70s, my mother for the first time touched the Sefer Torah, and she came to the Torah during the women's prayer group, and I can still see the tears flowing from her eyes. And in her own way, she was a feminist, and she certainly impacted on my thinking about that issue. And my father, for me, his greatest teaching was not to be afraid to think out of the box. He operated outside of the establishment. And during the year that he died, I was under tremendous criticism by the Rabbinical Council of America and then the Chief Rabbinate. And I never knew what my father felt about that, because for my father, a religious Zionist, there was the Chief Rabbinate and God in that war. And deep down, I never knew whether he agreed with his son. He had a wonderful, wonderful helper, Roel, and Roel called me towards the end of my father's life, and he said, he wanted me to know that Rabbi David Lau, the then Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, and it was from the chief rabbinate that the troubles came, was giving a class in Shlomo, and my father, who could hardly walk, insisted on going to the class, and when the chief rabbi was through, there was a long line, and my father, who could hardly stand, waited on line, and then spoke with him. And Roel said he overheard, and he spoke in passionate defense of his son. And that touched me very, very deeply. As I give this shiur, I'm looking around and I see many people with who've had losses, with whom I have sat during your Sheva. And so this shiur is not only dedicated to my parents, it's dedicated to your loved ones for whom you sat Sheva, and for whom many of you said Kaddish. I wanted to thank my dear, dear friend Shimi Katz, who many years ago, after 2 drashot, one on the Kaddish, one on Yizkor, he felt that it's something that I should commit to writing, and it's a long time since you made that suggestion, but the idea of developing concepts about the Kaddish is something that you, Shani, inspired, and I thank you. This is not a shiur based on an historical analysis of the Kaddish. That's not what it is. It's not a shiur which is based on a heavy analysis of mefarshim, of commentaries. It's based on what I was feeling during the year I said Kaddish for my father. And I want to encourage you, when you look at the Kaddish, don't be afraid to analyze it and allow yourselves to emote, because the Kaddish is a prayer of many different dances, of many, many different melodies. That's the power of its beauty. In the aftermath of the attack on the Tree of Life congregation, killing 11 Jews, the Pittsburgh Gazette ran a headline in bold Hebrew. In Hebrew, it was the Sunday edition of that newspaper. Yitgadel v'yitkadesh Shemei Rabba. Magnified and sanctified be God's great name. I was so moved by that headline that when in Pittsburgh, did my little bit to compose a nigun based on the words Imo Anochi B'Tzara. We are with you in your distress. Words from V'Teilim. K'tzat mehaor doche harbe min hachoshech. A little bit of light has the power to push away an abundance of darkness. And when I saw this headline, I added the names of those who perished and added the words Yitgadel v'Yitkadesh Shmei Rabbah. And I hope to send it off on the year anniversary to the rabbis of those synagogues. The high part where I include the names goes something like this. Cecil David and Rose, Sylvan Bernice, Richard, Melvin, Daniel, Irving, Jerry, and Joyce. Yitgadel v'yitkadesh Shemei Rabbah Yama divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. And in thinking about it, my reaction when I saw that headline was, really? It would seem that this was a moment when God's name was desecrated. In more normative times, when death takes life, one can similarly wonder whether it is the time to praise God. Yitgadel v'yitkadesh Shmei Rabbah. Magnified and sanctified be the name of God Be'omah in this world. And we'll be working from the first Kaddish Yatom in the Koren Sidurim, which we've distributed. It's after the Mitzvos Shir Chanukah, on page 61. And so how does one say, after the death of someone so close, magnified and sanctified may God's great name be? The traditional response is that the power of the Kaddish is that precisely when one suffers a serious loss, the mourner declares faith in God. This may be based on the Jobian idea when Job in chapter 1, he says these words, Adonai Natan v'Adonai Lakach, Yishem Adonai Mivorach. The Lord has given, the Lord has taken, blessed be the name of the Lord. Alternatively, these words form what can be called a declaration of faith that in the wake of the loss, God will ultimately prevail. Ultimately, Yitgadel v'Yitkadesh Shemei Rabbi. And maybe that's why the Kaddish has become not second nature, but first nature to many people. Even if we don't understand the words, it somehow touches a deep place in our hearts, in our souls. It's a declaration that Yeh Tov, God will overcome, God will prevail. My intent this evening is not to undermine this mainstream approach. My intent is rather to offer an additional pathway to understanding this glorious prayer. The Kaddish is divided into 3 sections. You could see it on these sheets, which we distributed. The first section is called Kiddusha, the second Bracha, and the third Shlama. Whatever I have to say, these are personal insights, and I very, very much would appreciate at the end of the shiur your feedback, either here or afterwards, as I'm thinking seriously of publishing this analysis.
Wow.
The Kaddish is divided into, thank you, Mark, where's my Mark? Into 3 sections.
That's good.
In each, the term Shmei is found. And that word Shmei is the central theme of the Kaddish. Yitgadel v'Yitkadesh Shmei Rabbi. In the beginning of the Bracha section, what do we say? Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach. And in the Shlama section, now I'm going to show my age, Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shmaya. It's close enough. Close enough to Shmei, it really means the same thing. Shmei literally means, there's a Tamapike, his name, referring to the name of the Lord, Shem Hashem. And if one were to ask me for 2 words that encapsulate what Yahadut, what Judaism is all about, my response would be to call B'Shem Hashem, to call out in the name of the Lord. When Avram and Sarah arrive in Israel, Perek Yud Bet of Breshit, they build an altar. And what does it say? Vayikra B'Shem Hashem. Abraham calls out in the name of the Lord.
Wow.
This calling goes beyond the utterance of God's name, encompassing the larger mission of Judaism. And that larger mission is the following: to bring Torah ethics or ethical monotheism into the world. This is spelled out later in Breshit when God says about Abraham, God declares that Abraham and his descendants have a responsibility. V'shamru derech Hashem lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. To follow the path of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice. That's when we began, and our seeds were planted by our first matriarch and patriarch. But as we became a people and we received the second luchot, and we are people of the second tablets, not the first tablets which were shattered, as we were given the second tablet, the Torah says, Vayered Adonai be'anan, we say this over and over in the Slichot, Vayatzeh v'imosham vayikra b'shem Adonai. And the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The specifics are then spelled out in the Yud Gimel Midot, in the 13 attributes, a call to imitate God by living a life of Adonai, Adonai, the Lord, twice, because as God is compassionate before and after a fall, we in the spirit of imitatio Dei should live with that compassion. El rachum b'chanun, it's to live a life of mercy, of graciousness, v'rav chesed, and kindness, ve'emet. It's not just kindness. Tzion b'mishpat yipadeh. The Rav, my Rebbe, in the Birkat HaMazon never said Bnei v'rachamav Yerushalayim Amen. He refused to say the word v'rachamav. Tzion b'mishpat yipadeh. Bnei Yerushalayim Amen. That's the din. That's the judgment. But my point is that the code words, the code term is Shem Hashem. And the mission is, as I've pointed out, to bring ethical monotheism into the world. When reciting the mourner's Kaddish, the bereaved acknowledge and offers thanks to the deceased for living a life of Shmei. Wow. For living a life of Shmei Rabbah, of bringing the principles of ethical monotheism into the world. And the next sentence for me is a very important sentence. Even if the deceased would not couch his or her contribution in godly terms, even if the deceased is foreign from God, would not talk about a monoistic order, thanksgiving is offered by mourners more broadly for the good the deceased did, leaving the world in a better place. That's the word which is repeated over and over. And the mourner is saying about the bereaved, thank you. Thank you for bringing Shmei, for bringing godliness, or if you will, bringing goodness into the world. Note that the Kaddish is in the future tense. Look at the first two words, Yitgadel v'Yitkadesh. Yitgadel is the future reflexive of Gadol magnified. The Yitkadesh is the future reflexive of Kadosh, sanctified. While death is death, and there's a finality and a reality of death, the legacy, the impact of the deceased could still live on. Indeed, there are people who are living but are not alive. They're only going through the motions of life. On the other hand, there are people who have died but continue to live as their impact continues to be felt. Travel the road from Yerushalayim to Tel Aviv, and there'll be signs directing us to the Bet Shemesh Cemetery. Only in Israel, the signs read, Eretz HaChaim. Can you imagine? The cemetery is called the land of the living. Wow. The legacy, the influence lives on. In reciting Kaddish, the mourner learns to move from a relationship of contact to one of presence. Contact are those moments in life when we literally connect to another through a direct meeting, a phone call, an email. Presence, it is metaphysical. It is feeling the spirit of the deceased. In a certain sense, presence is more embracing. Contact is limited to the moment of connections. Presence can potentially be experienced anytime, in any place. There was a time as a kid I would do things, I would just look around and make sure my parents weren't watching. My father once said in my heyday of camp, I don't tell you everything, but I see everything. Now that both are gone, and the relationship is not one of contact, but of presence, they're always present. We may think they're not watching, they're watching. From this perspective, the Kaddish is an expression of thank you to the deceased for magnifying and sanctifying the great name of God in this world. That's what the text means. We're saying, Yitgadel v'yitkadesh shmei Rabba ba'alma. We say, thank you for whomever we're saying the Kaddish. Thank you for magnifying and sanctifying the great name of God. Great, would there be an adjective modifying God in this world? Alternatively, Rabbah could have a slightly different meaning. The Kaddish expresses thank you to the deceased for greatly magnifying and thanking and sanctifying the name of God in this world. From that perspective, greatly is an adverb. The subtext is, and this is the key, that the mourner is not only saying thank you to the deceased for what they gave and continue through legacy give to the world, but the subtext that the mourner is offering a declaration of commitment. That's the first line after Kedusha, declaration of commitment to the legacy and teachings of the deceased. While relationships can be complex, this is so important. The Kaddish is an exercise of bracketing, blocking out the negative, thinking of the deceased's good qualities, and resolving to incorporate them into our lives. Given what I've just said, I could see some pushback. Well, suppose I'm thinking of negative feelings, things I don't want to remember. The exercise of saying the Kaddish is, let's push away the negative just for a few moments. Let's focus on the positive. Say thank you for the positive and commit oneself to incorporating those positives into my life. The Kaddish is not prose. It's poetry. It's magnificent poetry. It speaks elliptically, leaving us room to fill in the empty spaces. The opening words, Yitgadel v'yitkadesh shmei Rabba, reverberate with the deceased's good work. And the result of the deceased's good work, these are the words we have to add. The result are the words in the Kaddish. God's name is magnified and sanctified in the world. Yitgadel v'yitkadesh shmei Rabba. And this first section continues. It continues with the words Be'alma divrach yirutei yamlich malchutei. You could see the translation. In the world he created by his will. The Yamlich Malchutei, and may his rulership be established. My sense is that those words offer license to the bereaved to express whatever feelings one may have towards God. Every bereaved reacts differently to the pain of someone close dying. To be sure, there are emotions of highs and lows, sometimes distinct, sometimes interfacing. Such is the way of the world. That's why this fragment of the first section begins with the word Be'alma. In the world we have all kinds of emotions, all kinds of feelings. And feelings are not right, feelings are not wrong, they just are. Feelings are feelings are feelings. The Kaddish takes this into account, especially in its description of the mourner's relationship to God. And so in the Kaddish, the first word of that fragment is Ba'oma di, in the world that he, and it continues, created according to his will. Who's the he? Is that lowercase or uppercase? The he is uppercase. In liturgy, closeness to God is expressed by using the second person. Baruch atah, blessed art thou, blessed are you. Feelings of distance are expressed in the third person. Baruch hu, blessed is he. Here in the Kaddish, the third person is used, di. Thus, the mourner does not say, in the world you, God, created, but in the world he created. This, for me, mirrored the mourner's possible feelings after someone so close has died of estrangement from God. Even a respectful protest. Be'olma di, where are you, God? Why have you caused such pain? Why did my beloved leave this world the way she or he did? Di v'rochirute. V'rochirute is the opposite. It doesn't reflect a feeling of protest, but rather it reflects feelings of submission to God. Chirute is the acknowledgement that built into God's plan for life is death. Such is God's will. The price of living is dying. And more important than dying oneself is seeing someone close die. In humility, the mourner calls out, Divarach Chirute. You, O God, understand. We do not. You have created this world according to your will. Note that Virach Chirute is still in the third person. Virach Chirute, that he created according to his will. It's a submission to God's decree. Even when submitting to God's will, one may still feel that God is distant. And then V'yamlich Malchutei. Submitting to God's will does not mean that God is unaffected by the death of a human being. There is a teaching that with death, God is diminished. After all, the image of God as it functions within a human being is now lost. Feeling the suffering of the bereaved, God's rulership is not whole. And therefore, V'yamlich Malchutei is in the future tense. Your rulership is not now fully established. It will one day be established. The bereaved comforts God, gently telling him, all will be well. Your rulership will one day be fully established. God is self-existent. G minus W, God minus world equals what?
God.
God minus world
God.
equals God. God is independent of human beings. God is self-existent. But for God to be fully present in the world, God needs human help. It goes beyond the Abraham Heschel idea, God in search of the human being. God needs the human being to be manifest in this world. The Yamlich Malchutei expresses the mourner's feelings of resolve to do all he or she can do to make God whole, fully manifest in the world. This is in sync with the beginning words of the Kaddish. Yitgadel v'yitkadesh, which as noted is in the future tense. May you one day be fully great and fully holy. Given the death of a human being, God is not fully great or magnified. But in the Kaddish, we declare that one day God's greatness will again become whole. We who need to be comforted, we become the comforter of God himself. So if you look at that second line on page 61 in the Correll, Be'olma divarach Chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, that revolves around the bereaved. The first line revolves around the deceased. It's a declaration of commitment to the good of the deceased. The second line revolves around the mourner, allowing the mourner license to feel whatever we feel. D, God, you're so far, you're a he, you're a she, you're not a you. V'rach Chirutei, that he created according to his will. That's those who may submit to God's will, but even then it's the third person. That's feelings of submission, feelings of protest, feelings of submission. V'yamlich malchutei, that's the feeling of resolve. You need some help, God. V'yamlich malchutei, I'll offer the help and one day you'll be whole. And then that third subsection of the first section, B'chayechon u'v'yomechon the mourner calls out, in your lifetime, in your days, who is the mourner speaking to? Who is the mourner speaking to?
God.
I believe he's speaking to the congregation. He's saying to the congregation, all that I've said, may it be in your lifetime, in your days, Israel, and in the whole lifetime of the house of Israel, Bagala ubizman karev, soon and speedily.
Wow.
In this subsection, the Kaddish makes a U-turn. While the mourner needs comforting, sometimes the best therapy is not to receive, but to give. Sometimes. Look, as I've grown older, I've come to understand there's an art to receiving. Not simple to be on the vulnerable end and being open to that vulnerability. But sometimes the best theory to recuperate, sometimes the best theory even in deep angst at a loss, is not to take the comfort, but to give comfort. This is expressed when the mourner in the Kaddish says, the mourner turns to the community offering the hope that they too benefit from the teachings of the deceased and help bring sanctity into the world. That's what's happened. You all think of someone whom we've lost. You think of the good of that person, our commitment to that good. The chayechon uv'yomechon is our way of telling the congregation, join me in considering that good. And why not? Let's commit ourselves as a community to incorporating that sanctity into our lives. B'chayechon uv'yomechon, we say to the congregation, in your days, in your lifetime, in your days, uv'chayei dechol bet Yisrael, and in the lifetime of all the house of Israel, normatively Judaism moves from the particular to the universal. First there's the redemption of the Jewish people, and through the redemption of the Jewish people, the redemption of the world. The strong sense of national identity is not meant to contradict universal consciousness, but is a prerequisite to it. Hillel says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? That comes first. But then, if I'm only for myself, what am I worth? In the Kaddish, the movement is the reverse. From the universal to the particular. This is an age where young Jews are so involved in social justice. I pray from the social justice will come a sense of demanding justice for Am Yisrael. This is the flow of the Torah. How does the Torah begin? Breshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the world, and only after does God tap Sarah and Abraham, says, Vayom Hashem el Abraham, lech lecha, you go, establish the Jewish people in a Jewish homeland. It's much like the two blessings. Prior to the Shema, first we say Yotzer HaMorot, the creator of the luminaries. This is followed by the blessing of Habocher B'Amo Yisrael B'Ava, who chooses his people Israel with love. Having offered the hope already in the Kaddish, that God's presence be felt worldwide. We already said, Yitkadel, Yitkadesh, Shmei Rabbah, Be'oma. Having already made that, offered that worldwide hope, we turn inward, Uvechayei dechol bet Yisrael, and in the lives of all of Israel. Note, by the way, it says, Uvechayei dechol Yisrael. Chol is an all-encompassing, unifying term, inclusive of all Jews across the spectrum. Whatever one's background, whatever one's affiliation, whatever one's belief, everyone has something to offer. And as we're speaking to the community and the whole house of Israel, we say, Bagala ubizman kariv. When reciting the Kaddish, I wondered about that double language, Bagala ubizman kariv, soon and speedily. Death makes one acutely aware that nothing lasts forever. Hence the double language. Bagala uvizman kariv. The community is encouraged to act soon. speedily. And then the section ends with the words, V'imru, Amen. At the close of this section, the mourner turns to the congregation, urging them to verbally commit themselves. That's what the V'imru is, to bring Kedusha into the world. Amen is their clear declaration of assent. So if you look at the outline, the first section is Kedusha. While normatively, Kaddish is seen as a declaration of faith, and in no way am I undermining that position. We're seeing Yitkadel v'Yitkadesh me'Rabba ba'alma as a declaration of commitment to the deceased. Ba'alma divrach liutei v'yamlich malchutei, that's giving the bereaved the license to express whatever feelings one may have towards God. B'chayechonu v'yomechonu b'chayei d'chol bet Yisrael b'gala v'zman kariv, encouraging others to join in. Wow. With the word Amen, and this is a critical piece, the Kaddish turns from a monologue to a dialogue. I'm very proud of the way Kaddish Yatom is said in the Bible. I don't want to say anything bad, but in too many synagogues, Kaddish Yatom is time out when there's so much else going on in the synagogue. But here, Rav Stephen rises, Rabbi Anat, Rabbi Bracha, Rav Ezra, Rabbi Sarah, and our language is, let's listen closely as women and men say the Kaddish. That's critical. Kaddish, thinking about the sayer of the Kaddish, that's only half the Kaddish. The other half, which is critical, is the response. Remember Barbara Pretzfelder once said to me, she was saying Kaddish here at the Bayit for the year for her beloved father. She said to me, what I couldn't believe is that everyone was saying Amen to my Kaddish. I never forgot that. What do people remember about the Kaddish? I said the words. Barbara was saying, I can't forget that people said Amen. With the word Amen, the Kaddish turns from a monologue to a dialogue. The power of the Kaddish is not only in the words spoken by the mourner, but in the response of the community. And so the community had said, Amen, we concur. We're going to bring sanctity into the world. Moved by the mourner's words of Kedusha, the congregation takes it a step further. It's like a choir, declaring their preparedness to not only sanctify God's name, but, finish the sentence, to what? Not only to sanctify God's name, but to bless him.
Wow.
In many synagogues, the custom is everyone says Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach together. I don't think that's the way it should be done. After Vimru Amen, it's the congregation who first calls out, moved, Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach. And in response to the congregation, then the mourner is so moved and inspired, the mourner says, Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach. Moved by the mourner's words of Kedusha, the congregation takes it a step further, as I've just read, declaring their preparedness not only to sanctify God's name, but to bless him. Inspired by the community's response, the mourner repeats the refrain. Now this is the mourner speaking. For the congregation, what they're saying is, we're going to take our community obligations from Kedusha to Bracha. The mourner responds and says, in repeating the refrain, that the deceased not only was a great source of teaching Kedusha, but a great source of teaching, of leaving a legacy of Bracha. That's why the second section you can see here is called Bracha, dialogue, reaching higher and higher. And of course that begs the question, what is the difference between Kedusha and Bracha? And I must admit, when I discussed this with my son, Dove, he said, Abba, the truth is I can go both ways. But I'm looking at the Kaddish. And for the Kaddish, I think it's a movement upward. We're moving from Kedusha to Bracha. Most commentaries, and here I am leaning on commentaries, suggest that Kedusha is limitative. Bracha is expansive. This is their interpretation of the first time these words are found in the Torah, and firsts are always the headquarters of understanding the meaning of a word or a term or a concept. What's the first time we have these words juxtaposed? It's right in the beginning of Breshit. Vayivarech Elokim et Yom HaShvi'i Vayikadesh Oto. We say that in the Kiddush every Friday night. And so the Ibn Ezra suggests, Vayikadesh Oto, how did God sanctify the Shabbat? No work was done on the Shabbat. Rashi says it this way, no man fell from the heavens on Shabbat. And then the Ibn Ezra says, Vayivarech, a blessing means an increase in well-being. On Shabbat, the body is blessed with a renewal of its reproductive strength, and the soul with an increase of its intellectual and reasoning capabilities. Or as Rashi says, twice the amount of man fell on Erev Shabbat. Wow. So from that perspective, Vayikadesh is limitative. Vayivarech is expansive. Relative to Kaddish, the following can be suggested. While the section of Kedusha speaks to the deceased influence being short-term, I mean, how long does a person remember? Do we remember our great-grandparents? Do we know all of their names?
No.
Do we know all the names of our great-grandparents? I think about that often because 50 years from now, my great-great-grandchild is going to be asked the question, and some smart aleck is going to say, do you remember who your great-great-grandfather was? It was me. I don't know. I don't remember the name. How long does one remember? Kedusha speaks to the deceased influence being short-term. The section of bracha proclaims the legacy continues well into the future. That's why the language is Yehei Shloma Rabba Mivorach. It will be remembered well into the future. Perhaps so, because the flow of the Kaddish now includes the community. The community is the one who introduced the idea of bracha. With more people involved, the memory extends longer. Dr. Rav Weiss, our son, offered an alternative suggestion. He argued, this is a Briska kind of approach, that Kedusha is object-centered. It's the chetza. It's related to status. Bracha is the gavra. Bracha is subject-centered. It's interpersonal. To wit, if I walked up to my parents, I would walk up to my parents and I would say to them, give me a Kedusha? Or would I say, give me a bracha? Whenever I part company from someone I'm seeing in a hospital, I always part by looking at the person lying there and I say, can you give me a bracha? It's an empowerment to the person who doesn't feel well. To give is a pathway to healing. I've never asked somebody to say, give me a Kedusha, make me whole. Give me a blessing. Moving from Kedusha to bracha. At the outset of the second section of the Kaddish, look at its central term. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mivorach. There's that word Shmei. The word Shmei is found again. This time, it's not in the context of Kedusha, but it's in the context of what? Of bracha. For the community, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mivorach is a commitment to lift God's presence to another level. For the mourner, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mivorach is a declaration of the deceased's higher influence. And so, the refrain, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mivorach, Liolam Uomei Omaya, is said. For the congregation, we're going to take it to a higher level, bracha. For the mourner, the legacy is going to be not just short-term, but long-term. Uplifted by the community's declaration of bracha, the mourner is inspired to sing out 8 verbs. Each word has distinct meaning, but together they melodiously reach higher and higher, declaring that the departed brought and will continue to bring what? v'talal, and there are many English translations to this. I view the translations as having to pass a test, and that is, it's got to go from the high to the higher to the highest still. For me, it's from blessing to praise to glory to exaltation to extolling to honor to reverence to acclaim and acclaim of God's name. And if you'll note, Yitbarech v'shtabach v'pa'eh v'tromam v'naseh v'tada v'taleh v'talau shmei dekutsha berichu. Here the deceased is described as elevating God and his blueprint for the world 8 rungs, reaching new, higher, lofty levels. The musical cycle contains 7 notes, popularly sung do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. But there's another part to that tune, and what is that? Do. There's, however, an 8th note, do. The 8th is the same as the 1st, except that it's sung an octave higher.
I think that's from the Sound of Music.
Sound of Music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
8th in music is the same note as the 1st, but an octave higher, reaching new, unparalleled realms, extending well into the future. And here, what are we saying? The appellative title for God. What is the name of God as we take this to the highest level? Yitbarech, v'yishtabach, v'yipa'eh, v'yitromam, v'naseh, v'tada, v'taleh, v'talal. Shmei, there's that word Shmei. What are the next words? The Kutsha Berichu. What does Kutsha Berichu literally mean? The Holy One, blessed be He, combining sanctity and blessing. It reaches that higher level. And the way this is really done is the mourner recites Shmei de Kutsha, and who says Berichu first?
Wow.
The congregation. The congregation, having introduced the concept of bracha, join in declaring Berichu. Watch what happens now. And then we say in the second section, Le'elah min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata. Normatively, this is understood that this high level is more than anything that exists in the world. That word min, Le'elah means, I want to argue that Le'elah could mean not only high, Le'elah means high, but distinct. Le'elah could mean distinct. That is, there are deeds and teachings unique to the deceased. This may be the meaning of miko. The prefix mi. What does mi, the prefix mi mean? The prefix mi may not be comparative, it may be diminishing. That is, what the deceased did is distinct, not because it's more than all the blessings in the world, it's distinct from the songful blessing and comforting praise in the world. Let's take a look at the text. Le'elah, it is above and distinct, min kol birchata, not more than all the blessings, the songful blessings and comforting praises, but it is distinct from all the songful blessings and comforting praises. And by the way, note as well that the term here is birchata v'shirata, but really shirata modifies birchata. You see it in the text there? And what is the role of nechemata? What does it do? It modifies tushbechata. When we look at the first 8 verbs, God is blessed, God is praised. What are the first 2 of the 8? What are they? Yitbarech, v'yishtabach. Here, only the first 2 of the accolades mentioned earlier, Yitbarech, v'yishtabach, now find their way into the Kaddish again. Representative of all 8, but with modifies. Le'elah min kol birchata v'shirata. I don't like the way it's put in the Quran. Because shira modifies bracha. Not every blessing is a positive. Sometimes blessings could be a negative. Sometimes it could be a negative. You know, the text says, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you with money. V'yishmerecha, may he protect you from money. Those who have the blessing of money face whatever challenges they may face. All blessings can potentially have a negative consequences. Shirata reflects the hope that the blessings are songful, positive. Or tushbechata v'nechamata, praise tushbechata can be empty. Nechamata is the hope that the praise is real, never leading to arrogance. And then we say, Damiran Llama v'imru amen. In a word, the legacy of the deceased is so impactful, it will forever make an impact in the world. Damiran ba'oma, bringing to the fore a contribution no one else has or will ever make. Sometimes the name of the deceased will be associated with a contribution, sometimes not. Notwithstanding, the contribution is everlasting. And then the Imru, inspired, the congregation responds, Amen. Let's take a look at that second outline under Bracha. Bracha begins the dialogue, taking us higher and higher, from Kedusha to Bracha, from short-term memory to long-term memory. And long-term memory means that that individual is remembered as having offered something so distinct that no one else has ever or will ever make that contribution. Distinct from all, like there are no two same fingerprints, there are no two same soul prints. Everyone, we often carry scorecards and we compare ourselves to someone else. The scorecard that best we should carry is we should score ourselves against the best we can be. Everyone has something unique to produce. Le'ela min, distinct from. Birchata, modified by shirata. Tushbechata, modified by nechamata. If I would do it again, the third line would be a little different. The third line would say that even 100 years from now, there's stuff that's going to happen in this world that can be traced back 100 and 1,000 years later, that individual contributed to the world, that no one else contributed to the world. We may not know the author of who made that contribution, but that doesn't take away from the contribution. They tell a great story about Franz Rosenzweig when he died a terrible death. And in the end, I think he used to write with his mouth, with a pen in his mouth. And somebody came to him and to lift his spirit said, Professor Rosenzweig, you were quoted in synagogue, your book in your name. And he responded and he said, thank you very much. And he wrote out, I guess, with his teeth. But you know when you've made it? When your ideas are quoted without your name. It's a very interesting concept. When there's a contribution out there and it's not even attributed to you. It's taking Kaddish, Kedusha, to Bracha, V'imru, Amen. And all Damiran Ba'alma, that is said in the world, there's always going to be a contribution in the world that comes from all the way back from the deceased, inspired, V'imru, the congregation responds, Amen, we concur. And with this begins the third section. Yehei Shlom Rabba min Shania v'chaim Elena v'yakol Yisrael, V'imru, Amen. This section I call, as you could see, Shloma. It's a very complicated section because it's the last two paragraphs of the Kaddish Yatom. And some argue that it's really the same paragraph, except that the penultimate paragraph is in Aramaic, and then it transfers to the Hebrew. I'd like to argue differently, that each of the paragraphs has something unique to contribute. Consumed by the death of a loved one, the Kaddish now reminds the mourner to embrace life, a life of Shalom. When we're so consumed about death that we could become deaf people. It's important for the mourner to be reminded about the centrality of life, to embrace life, a life of Shalom. Shalom, or Shlama in the Aramaic, has many meanings. What does Shalom mean in the Hebrew? Hello, goodbye. And the joke, why?
Farewell.
Why do we use the same word for hello and goodbye? Because we Jews don't know if we're coming or going. But why do we say Shalom? What is shalom? Shalom is God's name. Goodbye is really God be with you. Shalom means may God be with you. Shalom is also a euphemism for the Torah. As the Torah is described, when we return the Torah to the ark, it's a pasuk from Proverbs, from Mishlei. We say, Eitz chaim hi lamachazit nimba v'tomchem u'shad dracheha darchi noam v'chol netivoteha shalom. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim. With this in mind, these words mean the following. This section begins with the mourner affirming that while the foundation of Torah comes from heaven, from Shmaya, Yehei Shlama Rabba, the great Torah, Min Shemaya, comes from the heavens, from the Shem Hashem. Its application is V'chayim. Its application is meant for the living, V'chayim. Note, as I pointed out, the similarity between Shmaya and Shmei, the central theme of the Kaddish and the code word of Judaism, the bringing of Shem Hashem, ethical monotheism into the world. You know, when I was a very young boy, I went to Haredi Yeshivot. And the impression I got, maybe I misunderstood the Rabbeim, but I've learned a long time, the talk that you give, or the drasha that you give, or the shiur that you give, is not the one that you give, it's what someone hears. That's what counts the most. And what I heard was that this world is a nothing world. What counts most is the next world. This world is a pathway to the next world. And it was Rabbi Soloveitchik in his magnum opus, in his Ish Halacha, the person of Halacha, who said it's the opposite way around. The movement of Judaism is not from this world to the next world, but it's ultimately from the other world, because at its foundation the Torah comes from God, and it applies to this world. It's an opposite movement. The movement of Halacha, and what does Halacha mean? The walk is not from this world to the heavenly next world, but from the heavens to the earth. These are the words of Rabbi Soloveitchik. The halachic person prefers the real world to a transcendent existence. This is extraordinary. The Ish Halacha prefers this world to the Llama, to the next world. Because here, in this world, the human being is given the opportunity to create, act, accomplish, while there in the world to come, the human being is powerless to change anything. And this is an important teaching for one who is in the throes of mourning someone who has died. This penultimate paragraph reminds the mourner it's about life. Yehei Shlama Rabba min Shemaya v'chayim. Leno v'al kol Yisrael. Leno is again that universal term, declaring that the responsibility of applying basic principles of Torah is meant for all humankind through the principles of the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, and more particularly for all of Israel, Val Kol Yisrael. Kol is an all-encompassing term, as I said before, suggesting that the Torah is meant for the collective Israel, regardless of background or level of commitment. And to this, the community assents and says, Amen. We affirm, we declare, and we say, even as we mourn the death of someone so close. That sentence where God says, behold, I place before you life and death. Ubacharta b'chayim. Choose life. Remember the legacy. Take it from Kedusha to Bracha. But it's what the Torah is a this worldly Torah. It's not a Torah that is meant for the next world. And then that last paragraph, also within the framework of Shloma. I love this paragraph. Oseh Shalom b'mromav. It's really the first paragraph in Hebrew. There's a little bit above those 8 terms, but there's a dramatic movement here from the Aramaic to the Hebrew. The final paragraph speaks to the inevitable confusion one may feel when losing someone close. And in this final paragraph we say, you, O God, who makes peace above, Oseh Shalom b'mromav, you who make peace above, who understands the mystery of life, grant us that we too, in the face of loss, achieve peace of mind. Hu Yaseh Shalom Elena. May he who makes peace in high places make peace for us and all of Israel. And all of Israel. Not coincidentally, This concluding paragraph is in Hebrew, deflecting from the Aramaic, the primary language of the Kaddish. Aramaic is the language of the exile. It represents the complexities, the challenges of making sense out of a life's ups and downs. Hebrew is the language of our history. One of the remarkable features of Israel is the rebirth of the Hebrew language. It's remarkable. Hebrew is the language of our history, the language of our homeland. It represents balancing out and coming to peace with feelings of despondency that often accompanies serious loss. Can we just have a little peace? Little peace. You know, Den Steinsaltz once wrote that on Shabbat, we are at rest and we are not even to grow spiritually. Shabbat, we step back from physical creativity and spiritual creativity. I've seen writings on the part of many, David Wolpe, Rabbi Wolpe, amongst others, who talks about the difference between swimming and floating. In a certain sense, floating requires much more faith. When you're swimming, you're beneath the water level, kicking feet, moving arms to propel oneself. When you're floating, you're above water, and you have this faith in the buoyancy that the water will lift you. And sometimes in this world, where we're all involved in propelling ourselves and swimming and getting ahead, we just need that respite of floating, even on Shabbat. Spirituality, just take a deep breath. Deep breath. That's what I'm feeling when I'm saying, Oseh Shalom b'Momma, you who know peace above God, give me the peace of mind here. Elena, v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. I know many people add the kol yoshvei toveh, but for me, in the Kaddish, the Elena, it's the movement of the universal to the particular. Here again, the Kaddish moves from the universal Elena to the more particular V'kol Yisrael, expressing the hope that inner peace will permeate all of humankind in Israel. The congregation is again inspired, Vibru, to respond, Amen. May it be so. Look at the bottom. Peace. Shlama. Yehei Shlama. Torah is this worldly, not next worldly. And Oseh Shalom b'Momma, the quest for peace. Notice, by the way, the movement of the Kaddish. You see the movement of the Kaddish?
Yeah.
From Kedusha to Bracha to Shlama. It mirrors the Kedusha found in the Shmona Esrei.
Wow.
How does the Kedusha begin? With what words in the Kedusha? Nikadesh Shicha, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh.
You always say that.
Kadosh, 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 right? And what's the next paragraph? Baruch Kavod, Kedusha to Bracha. And the next paragraph is Yimloch. Well, for me, that's close enough. Because the ultimate goal of the rulership of God, and I don't think this is a push, is to bring peace to Israel and to the world. The movement of both the Kaddish and Kedusha, and there are three types of Kedusha in the Shabbat service, is from the narrow to the broad to the all-encompassing dream of redemption. One more word. If you'll turn the page, if you wish, take this home, the whole top. I'm going to leave to you to read through. It's just an analysis from the book Holistic Prayer on the Kaddish Drabanan. That rabbinic Kaddish, which is said after the reading of a part of the oral tradition during the service, is added to the Kaddish Yatom before the Yehei Shloma, but I'll leave it to you to study that, and we'll just keep to the normative Kaddish Yatom. But as the Kaddish closes, what's the last paragraph of the Kaddish? It's Oseh Shalom b'Momma. As the Kaddish closes, we take 3 steps back and forward. Actually, the way that's halachically done is we take the 3 steps before we say Oseh Shalom. We step back, and then it's Oseh Shalom b'Momma, you God who know peace above. Hu Yaseh Shalom Olenu, we bow here. May you grant peace upon us. That's a universal concept. V'al kol Yisrael, and all of Israel, and let us say Amen. We move back, then say those words, and then we move forward. I remember many years back, as a very young rabbi, there were many young Jews who became involved in a Swami by the name of Baba Muktananda. And he and his chevra bought a hotel up in the Catskills. And I decided I wanted to go up. And I wanted to see what was happening.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there in his briefs, shirtless. He has long peacock feathers. And there were, it's not an exaggeration, there were many hundreds, probably 700 people in that room.
Wow.
A mincha during the week. It was really unbelievable. The estimates were that 80% were Jews. When he was through, people would line up, give him gifts. He would take the peacock feathers and you bow, and he would touch you with the peacock feathers. And I started speaking to Chevra, and I said, what draws you? And he said, many different things, many different things. But there was one thing that, one point that some Chevra said, and they said, Jewish prayer is all words. There's no movement. There's no dance. There's no song. Now, of course, we know there's song, but there's dance too. We bow, we fall to the ground, we lift ourselves up. It's okay to lift our hands. It's okay to do a little shuffle, a little dance. And before we say Shalom, we move backwards. And the movement, I've given all kinds of speeches. I actually am threatening, I just want to do this before it's too late. I've given speeches with words. I've given speeches through song. I once stood up and I said nothing, just silence. That was the best speech I ever gave. I want to try giving the song through dance.
Okay.
I am going to give a talk 2 weeks from this past Shabbat using poetry. I want to all welcome you to come. I want to try new phase of life, new things. So in life we...
That's doing the Rosh Hashanah service, right?
Yeah, Shabbat.
In
In life we inevitably face obstacles such as the death of a loved one. And that's why we step back. Stepping back in the Kaddish reflects the movement back. In time, however, we again move forward. Moving backwards, our eyes are on the deceased. I've often spoken about this. How do we move away from someone? We don't turn our backs. We don't turn our backs on the Western Wall. We move backwards, our eyes on the deceased, feeling their presence, integrating their life message into our own. My customs I learned from my father, who told me that he learned it from his father, that when I move forward to a point that's a little bit in front of where I started. Move back, come forward just a little bit further. It's like Tony and I went to see the Leonard Cohen exhibit, and my favorite line was the line they had on the door. It's through the cracks that light gets in. And you turn the loss. Loss is profound and sometimes can't be fixed, but you turn it into something higher, into opportunity. In a certain sense, Kaddish is a coping mechanism, a process of managing death. In this spirit, I stood in front of the caillou back in 1983 after my mother died. It's more than 35 years ago, it's 36 years, and I stood up as a rabbi who thought he knew something, and now I know much less. And I offered an apology, and I said something like this. I always thought that my role as a rabbi was, when there's pain, to find the words to remove the pain. When there's suffering, to stop the suffering. To mend the broken heart. To lift the heaviness. If it's dark, turn on the switch and make it light. And then I said that with the death of my mother, I've come to realize that it's impossible. One can't remove the darkness. And in memory of my mother years ago, I wrote these words concerning the loss of someone close, and it's on the bottom box. Mashal Yamaha domem. To what can death and mourning someone close be compared? L'adam shenichnas letoch cheder chashuch. ונתקל בכל מיני דברים שמפוזרים בתוך החדר. בכל פעם שנכנס לחדר, הוא לומד יותר ויותר בדיוק איפה הדברים נמצאים. כך ניכר בהם פחות ופחות, עד שאחרי זמן מה, הוא מכיר את המקום היטב, ולא נתקל בשום דבר, למרות שהחשך, החדר עדיין חשוך. כמו כן המוות. יש חושך במוות שאי אפשר לגרשו, אבל אפשר ללמוד איך להמשיך לחיות למרות החושך הזה. To what can death be compared? To a person who enters a darkened room for the first time and trips over the furniture. Each time he enters the room, she learns more and more where the furniture stands. In time, he becomes familiar with the room, and despite the darkness, knows how to get around. So too darkness. There is darkness and death that cannot be chased away. But it is possible to learn how to continue to live despite the darkness which forever remains. Kaddish helps us navigate a dark room and in time make our way forward. It's God's hug, a human embrace. The Kaddish, meaningful, sweet, timeless, poetic words. Yikadil v'yikadesh shemei Rabbi. I'm going to stop here and we'll stay another 5 minutes if anybody has
No, it's okay.
reflections.
Yeah.
Mark would be the first one.
No way.
Reflections or questions or thoughts. Now, this reminds me of, I was once a math major and I was taking complex variables. But my mind wasn't on math anymore. And Dr. Kranya looked at me and he said, "Do you have any questions?" I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, you understand everything." And I was afraid to tell him, "No, I don't understand." So you have to make me feel good. I need one question, one observation, one whatever. Yes, please.
In Judaism, do they believe that there's a heaven for the deceased, a paradise? Is that ever brought up?
No, it is brought up exactly what it means. And in fact, our son, who wrote a book, Pious Irreverence, which is the theology of protest, is now writing a book on Gehenna, which loosely translated is hell.
Wow.
And I said, "Dov, we don't believe in hell." He said, "Are you kidding? It has so many different, thousands of different formulations." And he's really a scholar, but Toby tries to keep him on the ground, so she suggested 2 titles for his book. The first title is Go to Hell. And the second title, Toby, do you remember? What was it? What the hell? To hell with you, I think it was. So, look, there are different beliefs of heaven, but I think for our purpose now, let it be said that we believe that every human being is endowed with the image of God, with a glimpse of eternality. We have a little bit of God in us. When we bury, we do not bury people. We bury bodies. We show respect to the body because the body clothed the human being. Now, from a medical perspective, it's a body and not a person because the heart is not functioning, the brain is not functioning, the nervous system is not functioning. But from a Jewish theological perspective, it's a body and not a person because the Tselem Elokim, the image of God, the soul that is eternal, is not there. So from that perspective, if heaven means that there is life after death and that the legacy and impact of the influence continues, that's what the Kaddish is all about. When it comes down to it, the Kaddish for me is not only a declaration of faith. I'm arguing that while God is the centerpiece, He's not the only centerpiece. It's not only a declaration of faith, and it can be said by people who don't believe, who are not sure about belief. It is a declaration of thank you to the deceased and of commitment to the good that the deceased brought into the world. The kitzur, that's really what it's all about. And it's a something, it's a godliness, if you will, or a goodness, if you want, that continues to be. And that could be the heavens. That's the life after death. Now, if you read through Maimonides, he's going to tell you exactly what it looks like. But Maimonides is a great rationalist. He envisions we're up in heaven, we're wearing crowns, and what are we doing? He's the arch intellect. We're studying Torah, and we're figuring out all the complex formulas.
Wow.
I'm comfortable with the definition that I offered. Life ends with death, but the legacy and the influence, that truth keeps marching on. It keeps marching on. We'll take one more comment and then we'll stop. Anyone? Reflection, question? Yes, please. Just speak loud and so I can hear you.
My question is on this, what you just spoke about now, but maybe more about, can you speak a little bit about the various time periods that people say Kaddish for, obviously, and how they came up with different...
Right. That's, it's a great question. It's a question I'm going to take, because that's another shiur, and one of the things that has taken me 50 years to learn is, believe it or not, I try to stick to the topic. I'm sure many of you are wondering, you stuck to the topic. But if I ever do produce this, it's going to be sort of like this is Shimmy's idea, kind of a giveaway on the Kaddish. And it's not a simple piece what we went through, and I really need feedback and want to, I am, when it comes to this stuff, really a perfectionist, even though I know that whatever my thinking, it falls so far short. But the attempt here is to really, there's so much to be said about the Kaddish. And when it's said, how it's said, and all of that. So, but in brief, it's the Kaddish is said for 7 relatives. The person has died, and the closest relative is mother, father, sister, brother, son, daughter, spouse, partner.
Wow.
I believe you said Shiva for partner as well. And those are the 7. And for all relatives, it's for 30 days. For parents, we say Kaddish. The mourning period is for 12 months, and we say Kaddish for 11 months. And perhaps this is a good story to close with. When I said Kaddish for my mother, as you know, I'm much better for you now, but I am improved. But there was a time I was really, unfortunately, derelict. And but when it came to saying Kaddish for my mother, I was crazed. I was crazed. I just didn't miss a Kaddish except for once. In February of 1984, look it up, the West German government decided to sell fighter planes to Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia was then the arch enemy of Israel. Do you remember the F-15s and the AWACS? So we took over the German consulate here in New York, and it was early, it was February, so sunset was pretty early. And so we started about 12, and we sat in. And I'm looking at my watch because I want to say Kaddish for Mincha. And Glenn Richter, God bless him, we were on the 19th floor. It's already 4 o'clock. I hear him banging on the door. I guess there was like a back stairwell, and I could hear him banging. And he's screaming, we're 9 people, the rabbi needs to pray, the rabbi has to say. That's what happened. And the consul general said, he's sitting in with his friends. I'm not going to let you in.
Wow. And
that's the only time they arrested us, and that's the only time we said Kaddish. And I actually wrote a piece, and it appeared in Newsday. I said, those Germans, they're still the same. They're still not letting us pray. Kaddish that was the only time. As for my father, I actually didn't miss a Kaddish, which is very unusual for me, because I'm not if you come when I come, you know you're not on time. I got to do better. But I remember when, my father died in Israel in his bed. Great blessing if that can happen. And in Israel, the custom is you say Kaddish before burial. So they finally take my father out. We're in the sort of like a square outside of his apartment in Yerushalayim, behind the Yahrzeit building. And right then, as my father was being taken into the hearse, that's when we were supposed to say Kaddish. And we didn't have a minute. I said, oh my God. I promised my father I would try, and I'm going to miss the first Kaddish. So the driver of this makeup person was just sort of like a pickup truck. He says, no, you know, you're in Israel, don't worry. And he vanishes, and about 5 minutes later he comes back. Next door to my father's apartment complex, there was a home for teenagers who were challenged with real serious behavior problems. He pulled out the whole school. And they stood with such respect as Kaddish was being said. Only in Israel. Only in Israel.
Wow.
So, in my mother's Kaddish, I was saying it for 11 months, and I went to my Rebbe with this woman. I said to Rabbi Yeshua, I said, Rebbe, I've been saying Kaddish for 11 months. I want to say it for 12 months. And as he always did, he said, well, make your case. And I made the case, and frankly, it's a pretty decent case. That if you want, you could say it for 12 months. And he really would tell me what to do, rarely. He would either nod and say, even if I disagree, you can do it your way, or I do agree and do it your way. He looked at me and he said one word. He said, stop. That's all he said. And he didn't really say more, but I kind of got it. When you look at all of the morning periods of Kaddish, they're never whole numbers. When you sit 7 days, it's not a whole 7 days.
Wow.
You get up in the morning. The 30 days, get up in the morning. You don't say Kaddish for 12 months, you say it for 11 months. And I think the message is, it's that end message of Hey Shalom Rabban and Shania. Remember the deceased? And Debbie, I now have the honor to daven near your father's plaque too. It's in my mother's plaque right over there. It's
Wow.
the 8th one in. My mother is the 9th one up. It's this crazy stuff. I used to think, what value is this? And yet, you know, it does have that emotional value. And interestingly enough, for my father, I continued saying it in the 12 months, but I only said the rabbinic Kaddish, and it wasn't the same.
Wow.
Sometimes it's just best, and I guess everyone reacts differently. The stopping at the 11th month, I think, has a certain power of taking the whole message of Kaddish into account. I want to thank you for coming out. It's late, and good to see you, Bia Shana Tova. I'm to come on my way to Israel tomorrow, and to see the children and the grandchildren. Thank you for coming out.
Okay, let's see.